This is the second part in a 7-part series that I'm making about all of the old games that I played during the 2020s, or the past 3 years, basically. And the first episode was about Max Payne, and although I would suggest watching the first part, you actually don't have to, because these episodes kind of work as their own essays. Although the first part just kind of introduces why I am doing this project in the first place. I'm really appreciative of all of the positive feedback that I got for that. Genuinely, thank you guys. I'm sorry I've been a bit late with this one because I have just moved and yeah, it's been quite a lot to deal with. But here is the second episode about Half-Life and pacing. Half-Life is one of those properties that no one will ever stop comparing to other games in its genre, so it's no surprise that it must be one of the best of its kind. My only experience with the Half-Life franchise before this was Gmod, and that barely counts. I saw all of the assets and character models present in Half-Life 2, but without any of the original context. Conveniently for me, there was a remake of the first game, as well as a follow-up/prequel, both released in 2020. The latter I only managed to experience this year. Steam reviews claim the remake is the best way to experience the classic game, so of course I got that version. First of all, I want to praise the sound design for all of these games. There is a reason why they are so iconic.
No! Stop!
I still quote the scientist voice lines whenever I see the opportunity.
Gordon doesn't need to hear all this. He's a highly trained professional.
All of the enemy sounds and environment ambience are incredibly distinct and recognizable. I had to start with that because what I'm about to say will definitely piss off a lot of people, and before you dislike this video and/or shout at me in the comments and leave, please hear me out. After fully completing the remake and the original afterwards, I regret to inform you that Half-Life 1 has to be the most frustrating and painful experience I've had with a first-person campaign of my entire life.
Please, just hear me out, please!
If I didn't want this video to be thorough, I would have closed the game halfway through and never opened it again. Even just recording the footage for this video was a complete slog and I hated every minute of it. I've definitely played worse games, mind you, but nothing could have prepared me for the hell that was the second and third act of Half-Life 1. You could say the half-life of this game is about 6 hours, because everything after that loses half the quality of what came before. All of the impressive features of the original have lost any and all redeemability that existed at the time. All of the storytelling being done without cutscenes doesn't alter the fact that there isn't much story to be told. The first-person gameplay has become a relic of the past, and that has actually been worsened by the remake because the design of the original enemy placement and AI was suited for the faster movement and gunplay of the Gold Source engine. There is barely any variation in gameplay except for the occasional sprinkle of action set pieces and puzzle arenas, but because it's so occasional, I often didn't understand that I was taking part in them, and usually acted as I would in any other situation. It doesn't help that both games still have major issues in terms of bugs. There was one time in Black Mesa where an NPC just didn't continue their script, and I couldn't progress until I did a hard reset of the entire level. The reason I played the original as well is because I thought there had to be some aspect to the original game that made people swoon over it for this long, and also just to compare and contrast to see what they changed and added in the remake. Unfortunately, it too was disappointing. I only slightly enjoyed it more than the remake because there was less of it. In all seriousness, I believe the changes made in Black Mesa only managed to worsen the original's pacing. While Black Mesa feels like a more realistic interpretation of a place like Black Mesa, Half-Life is a more intuitive and enjoyable one to play through. Black Mesa manages to feel much more superficial and gamey in its level design. Every chapter follows a formulaic, reach-locked passage, go through 3 pathways killing the same 4 enemy archetypes to press a button, go back to the main passage and move on to the next level until you reach another locked passage, and so on. Having said that, the first half of the original and the first third of Black Mesa are genuinely great examples of FPS level design. After On a Rail, however, both versions derail, pun intended, and become horrible and draining. I don't even have to mention how awful Zen and the Nihilith boss fight are, but the puzzles in particular are much worse in the original because there is no way to tell what is a puzzle element and what is a part of the environment. There are many times where it introduces an interactable object or mechanic without telegraphing it to the player. I don't know if I have been spoiled by more modern games with more accessible puzzles, but this game in particular tripped me up more than any other old game I played, so I doubt it. Take this sequence, for example, where you are presented with 2 dead ends, infinitely respawning enemies, and a turret. Now, immediately, you would assume to go to the turret and kill the enemies that are chasing you. The first thing that you see, the first frame, is filled with this large building with a passage underneath. There is a big sign in the center of the screen that says Hangar 16 Loading Bay Access. So you would assume that underneath that is what you're supposed to be targeting, is the exit, basically. Because in addition to that, everything underneath that is green, which is completely contrasting from the rest of the level. Now, when you went there before, it was a complete dead end. So hopefully you would assume that when you shoot it, something would blow up and it would create a passage or something like that. But when you actually do shoot it, nothing happens. So at this point, you're probably completely confused, and so you just continue shooting the enemies that continue to spawn. Now, what you're actually supposed to do is just look away from the attention-drawing middle of the screen and look towards the very edge. Now, the very edge is completely beige, which is fitting with the rest of the game because the entire game is orange and beige. And when you do this, you might notice a large door. But up to this point, turrets have never actually been used to blow up doors before, so you don't actually assume to shoot it. You just continue shooting the enemies. But what the game expects you to do is to accidentally, I guess, shoot the door and blow it up. But the player would never assume that because the door is the same color as the rest of the level. The game is entirely relying on the player missing the enemies and shooting the door behind them. And you can actually see in this footage when I'm intentionally shooting the door, I shoot it once and it doesn't blow up. So you can probably understand the frustration that I'm feeling at this point. And there's such a simple solution to this problem that I can think of, and it's just to have one enemy shoot a door down before this level happens. Like, just have one scene or one sequence where an enemy shoots a gate open with a large turret, and so now the player knows that they can use turrets to shoot down doors. It's such a simple fix, but I'm not gonna go into how to design levels or how to fix this game because I don't think I'm quite equipped to do that. The main point is this game sucks and I hate everything about it. In one of my favorite games of all time, Super Mario Galaxy 2, it introduces many mechanics quickly and does so effectively without relying on tutorials by making the player figure it out by accident. For example, in this level, these snowballs allowed the player to create a convenient path across the lava. The player wouldn't know that because it's never been used before, but the developers intentionally placed these boxes around it so the player would spin to break them, and would you know it, the snowball gets pushed into the lava. Thus, the player learns that snowballs can be used to get across. This is only one solution to this problem, but the primary method is having a consistent and readable design language. I know that Mario is technically a children's game, but that doesn't excuse games designed for adults having confusing design choices. Now, you might say, oh, but doesn't Half-Life do the same thing as Super Mario Galaxy 2, where the solution is found by accident? Well, that's not the same thing because all of the design is pointing towards something else and just completely distracts you, whereas in Super Mario Galaxy 2, the boxes are meant to be there to draw the player to the solution. Half-Life 1 is outdated in all respects, and is definitely not worth playing in the 2020s. The only mark of its quality is that it was a foundation for other games to supremely improve upon. One of those other games happens to be Half-Life 2. It not only fixed all the problems I just listed, but it also inspired many future games in its own right. It has one of the best first-person campaigns of all time, but why is that? I think a key factor in its brilliance is pacing. That word seems to be thrown around a lot in discourse. I've mentioned it quite a few times in this video alone, but what does it actually mean? In passive mediums, pacing is generally tied to these three things: plot progression, characterization, and world building. Scenes can contain one or three of these things at once, and I'm not going to be talking about individual scene pacing because that is an entirely different conversation, but that also is a very important part of how well a story is told. To me, good pacing means striking a balance in how much and how fast information is given at any moment. Pacing can be increased and decreased to fit the tone and feeling that a particular scene needs. When the viewer is given too much information at once, or doesn't have any time to process events, it has the potential to remove any dramatic or narrative weight in that moment. I'm about to talk about Star Wars, so if you want to close this video and unsubscribe, please do that now or forever hold your peace. In Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, nothing that happened in the plot ever made me care because it passed by in a few minutes. Take the death of Chewbacca, for example. He is supposedly killed by Rey in the classic tug-of-war game that takes place, and the audience is meant to believe that a major character that everyone knows and loves has just died. This would be extremely impactful in the narrative, and the tone would drastically shift if they didn't show Chewbacca alive and well just 2 minutes later. The opposite problem also exists, where if the pacing is too slow, it bores the viewer and they don't care about what's going on because most likely they're asleep, which is what happened in the Star Wars prequels. How is this relevant to video games, you might be asking? And my first response would be, maybe wait until I get to the point before passing judgment on my writing skills. However, my second response would be, just like how plot progression is linked to narrative and emotional weight in passive mediums, the same could be said of mechanical and level progression in games. Being stuck in a single story or gameplay scenario for too long can be exhausting and tedious for the player, which happened very often in Half-Life 1. Or introducing a new mechanic and taking it away too quickly can feel underwhelming, like how I felt about Titanfall 2's campaign. This pacing is not only affected by level or narrative design, but also difficulty. Using difficulty spikes effectively can bolster and sometimes even immortalize specific moments in a game, like in another one of my favorite games of all time, Resident Evil 4. The pacing in Resident Evil 4 is immaculate. It perfectly spaced out when to stress the player and when to let the player breathe. It also knew exactly when to throw them into a new gameplay experience like the cavern defense or the roller coaster ride, and when to introduce a new mechanic like the parasites that change the way you play the game halfway through. Half-Life 2 has a similar adept knowledge of pacing. There was never a moment where I felt as if a level was dragging on or becoming tedious. It seamlessly transitions into new gameplay styles and settings. There is a reason Highway 17 is such an iconic segment. Half-Life 2 has such good pacing that a chapter like Raven Home, which takes the player and puts them in a completely new setting and genre, just works. Which is mostly a testament to how well designed this chapter actually is. What also helps is the addition of the physics gun. So many more possibilities in combat and puzzles. The mechanical progression was natural and understandable. Half-Life 2 impacted how stories were told in games going forward. The way Half-Life 2 takes advantage of the lack of cutscenes as opposed to Half-Life 1 is the grander scale and insanely cinematic moments of the campaign in Half-Life 2. Because it feels as though you're no longer watching a protagonist be an action hero in cutscenes, you are actually in those cutscenes. You are taking part in the action yourself, which is a point that will come up in a later video. This set a precedent for what first-person action should actually look like and feel like. Without this and Halo, we wouldn't have these massive franchises like Call of Duty or Battlefield, where these cinematic action set pieces are taken for granted. But this design philosophy would only be improved by its successor, Half-Life Alyx, which took advantage of the VR medium to literally put you in the shoes of the protagonist. But what gave Half-Life 2 its cinematic quality was the Source engine, which was far more revolutionary than it first appears. The Source engine was so powerful that it only stopped being used for games in 2020, a full 16 years after the fact, when it came back full circle for the first Half-Life. What it excelled in was facial expressions, making the seamless storytelling more tangible. Characters were a lot more endearing and expressive. The writing, as a result, leaned more into the light-hearted aspect of the first.
About that beer I owed you.
As Noah Kowal-Gervais put it,
The cheers-ish quality of everyone knowing your name is often an excuse just to have characters smile at you, which at the time was an incredible technological breakthrough.
The story was so much more engaging than the first game, and the main reason for that is its character dynamics. The antagonistic force actually had a face, and that face listed more than one emotion. There was always a silent dialogue happening with the blocking and subtle mannerisms. Sorry, I just kind of threw in a word that some of you may not know. Blocking essentially means the placement/movement of actors in a scene. This animation technology was used for RPGs like Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, to heighten the performances of the all-star voice cast to great effect.
What a scene, man! Hoo-wee! They just plop you out here like a naked baby in the woods. How about that?
Despite the many problems I have with that game, one thing I can't criticize it for is its memorable characters. These animations hold up better than most RPGs in the last decade. The landscapes also served more of a purpose than the narrative. This was a step further than cutscene-less storytelling, this was dialogue-less storytelling. Take the opening for example. The intro was slow. This is the manipulation of pacing I was talking about. Even if there was not much going on, the game still gripped your attention through its scale and detail. Even though you weren't directly being given information, you were still extracting meaning through the design. Even though people tend to praise the tram ride in Half-Life 1, I think it is extremely unengaging visually and restrictive from a gameplay perspective. It functionally is a cutscene. Now, I could talk about how the Combine resembles imperialism and the Holocaust, or how Dr. Breen brings forth ideas of Nazi collaborators, but we'd be here for... Oh, shit. The English exam started an hour ago! Oh, wait, sorry. I don't have those anymore, That was, let's move on. I guess I should probably talk about the 2 episodes that take place immediately after Half-Life 2. I didn't really like them. They happen to commit the same acts of terrorism as the first game, and they both lose steam towards the end, pun intended. Episode 1 ends with an escort mission in which you take 7 groups of people across the same linear path, fighting endless waves of enemies. Episode 2 ends with a balloons tower defense round that goes on for an hour too long. Although Episode 2 finally made the torch drain a different source of power to breathing. They felt more like homework that I had to do to get the full story, and not an extension of the genius campaign design of Half-Life 2 that I wanted. Alternatively, Portal perfectly builds on the Valve design and distills it into a 12-hour experience, cutting out all the fat in both design and art direction. I'm lumping both Portals into one because I think they work best as one continuous narrative. Both games are masterclasses in video game design and writing. I think Portal is the peak of Valve as a developer and publisher. They managed to make a first-person shooter without guns, except the Portal-making kind. The puzzles are genuinely fun and don't get stale. Despite the lack of faces, you still get a sense of expression and connection with GLaDOS and Wheatley.
Hello, this is the part where I kill you.
And I think that's a testament to the quality of writing and acting being displayed. I can't really think of much else to say. It's just a fantastic experience that I wish I had sooner. So I guess the moral of the story is, don't play Half-Life 1. Sorry, in all seriousness, Half-Life is the reason why we have games like Halo, Fear, Portal, Titanfall 2, and so many other iconic first-person shooters, and that cannot be understated. The Half-Life franchise taught me the importance of pacing, how it affects the quality of a single-player game, and the reason why Valve has been remembered for so long as a developer, even though they stopped releasing games. Thank you so much for watching this episode. I really hope you enjoyed this one, even though I did have some kind of hot takes. And please tell me what I got wrong or could have improved in this video, because I live off feedback and nothing else. I really hope that I can finish the rest of these parts a bit quicker than this one, because yeah, I just really got caught up in a lot of stuff going on at the moment. I do still have a Patreon page if you want to check that out. I would really appreciate it, because again, I moved and the Australian housing market is fucking awful right now. So yeah, if you could give anything, I will put names in the credits like every other YouTuber, but I do also have the perks of getting access to my scripts before the video comes out and some early edits. I'm hoping that if I have enough supporters, I will be able to do monthly update videos where I kind of give my opinions on certain things and maybe some Q&A. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.